Well, hi everybody. Joining me today is Jonathan Trapman, author, photojournalist, and by all accounts, troublemaker. Hi Jonathan, how are you?
I'm very well indeed, and thank you for that very succinct and appropriate introduction.
Okay, cool. Do you want to just give us a bit more background about yourself and let everyone know? Because like me, you're based locally, aren't you, in Glastonbury?
Yes, I've been here for about 15 years. I won't say man and boy, I'm far beyond that. But no, I started my whole venture into the public arena when I was around the age of 20, when I entered Fleet Street as a photojournalist, because I'd already then done the requisite 3 years training to become a photographer in college, and I never really wanted to work for anybody, be employed, as it were, as a sort of ticket employee. I've always wanted to be freelance. I've always been self-employed, and so I started off in Fleet Street, which was in the early 70s, the most eye-opening experience, because you really got a handle on how much, even then, they were asked, and we were asked, to lie, to write our own copy and say what we wanted, to make up stories. And part of me said, wow, this is thrilling. And another part said, this does not, even at that young age, this does not resonate with my soul. I am not going to go here. So foolishly or wisely, I left Fleet Street, having worked for the Times, the Express. I had 3 weeks on the Sun, which I gave up in desperation because it was so boring having this sort of beautiful thing in front of you with no words in her mouth. And all my peers said, "You're foolish. That's the golden job." I said, "Well, you can have it." And so yeah, I went from there, from the frying pan into the fire, went into advertising, became one of the industry's top photographers, and really in that period of being in the advertising and marketing world, I really discovered how the whole propaganda machine works, how the whole advertising industry is geared and has always been geared on programming the population. Of course, I took the shekels at the beginning because, hey, I'm good at what I do. So I get paid very handsomely, in that industry. But eventually, in the late 80s, having discarded a project that I was working with two other people, one who was probably the best software developer in the world at the time, who happened to live near me in Stoke Newington. We actually created what then became Google and Facebook and all the rest, but we were way beyond, before our time. But learned valuable lessons in that, not least of all when I had a dream that told me to give it up and give it away, which I did. 89, the world went through its economic crash, and the eventual owner of that program that we built, that someone I gave to for free, sold for nearly £1 million, was Hachette in France. And they nearly went to the wall in that 89 crash. Not many people know that such a big corporation can be taken down by, the foolishness of the elite who are constantly playing the machine. And so I then went and I decided it is time for me to take my own reins and actually to speak my truth, which by then I had done a lot of inner work and continue to do so. And so I was at that point very balanced to be able to really take on the beast. And I've done that ever since. And it's been one of the most enjoyable parts of my life ever, is to be there at the vanguard of truth, spreading it. And like yourself, and I have to say that when I recently came across your work that you're doing, the passion that you come away with is so mirrored by my passion. I felt a real kinship in what you're doing, and also, the truth speaking. It's just great fun, is it not, Sid?
It is, and actually, your story sort of mirrors my story in a way. That's sort of what I did. I came from acting and then went into filmmaking and journalism, and yeah. So we both ended up in Glastonbury. And I read your article this morning on your shopping trip, and I just found it unbelievable. This is the way things are going. So do you want to just talk a little bit about your adventure this morning, and then what we'll do is we'll kind of go back over things and go a bit wider, I think.
Yeah, well, simply my wife and I went shopping yesterday, as we often do together, which, as I understand, unless the law has changed, that is not an illegal act. But many who commented on my posting on Lidl's Facebook page said that, oh yes, this guy is an absolute fool because he shouldn't be doing this, is against the law. Well, you know, there are so many fools on social media, we know. But what happened was that we walked into the store. I was having a private conversation with my wife as we were walking along the aisle, and I mentioned something about a BBC article about wearing masks, which instigated this stranger to come up to us and say, "I'm wearing this mask so that you are protected." And I said, "Oh, really? Well, that actually doesn't prove the science, but anyway, okay." And she, of course, being as I call them, SJW, a social justice warrior, became terribly offended and stomped off, and that was it. So we continued our shopping. Then I think the next episode was when I was on an aisle and I was picking up some goods, and then this tannoy comes across. It doesn't say this, but it's like, "You will obey, you must do this, respect the elders and the other shoppers and our staff, and wash your hands for 20 seconds every time you wash your..." And I just let my head up to the ceiling and shouted at this particular speaker in the ceiling. I said, "Stop treating us like bloody children." And evidently, the manager at that time evidently said, "I heard you say that because I was standing next to you." And therefore, you know, in retrospect, I thought, well, why didn't you bloody well say anything if that was inappropriate, which he didn't. However, a few minutes later, I was walking down an aisle where I could see there was this impoverished being weeping copiously and completely crumpled up. And she was saying to the manager, who happened then to be there, "Oh, it's that guy. He was the one that really upset me. He was the one that did this, that, and the other." And so we were then accosted a few moments later in another aisle and told to leave because we had upset a customer. And I very succinctly and politely reminded him that, in fact, we were the injured party who was approached by a stranger in the first place that started off all this cacophony. But presumably, being the victim, we're the criminal, and the criminal is the victim. And you know, cutting a long story short, that was the sort of top and tail of it. But it was very funny because here I am. I'm 70. I'm an elder, and yet I'm treated like shit. And I mean, I do. On one side, I find this hilarious because it actually demonstrates, and that's why I wrote the article immediately. That's why it demonstrates the lunacy that we're all being forcibly dragged into under a pretext that there has been a most dangerous pandemic, they call it. No, I mean, it's not a pandemic, but so, okay, they use the word because it frightens people. And that, of course, as you and I both know, fear is the great weapon in this war, because while you've got people fearful, they will not bother to A, be critically thinking, and B, even ask questions, the simplest questions about the sort of rubbish that they're being thrown at them.
Yeah, they can't, can they? You know, when you're in fear, that's it. You stop thinking, don't you?
Absolutely. And I mean, one of the things that I learned very early on in my process of getting to know who I am was you've got to get rid of that fear, because the only fear you need is the natural fear of flight or fight. That is the only fear. That's there for your protection. Any other fear is your construction. And however you construct it, however you build it, however you maintain it, you know, the baggage that you're carrying, that's your responsibility to either live with it in impoverishment or get rid of it because it is utterly, utterly unnecessary. And so many people have not got that far to recognize that it is their own fear that is the food that feeds this machine that is engulfing us daily more and more, to the horrendous ends that you and I both know of where it's going and where it was always going to go, because they wanted this. And they've always used, as you know, they've always used pandemics, or not pandemics, but they've always used this virus thing for how many decades? I mean, it's been going on, the SARS, the Ebola, the whatever they call it, it's all the same injection. How is it working? How is it working? Testing, testing, how is it working? And now they have a beautiful mixture of everything, of a complete and utter global economic collapse that they have to hide, because it's gone beyond being able to be stopped or whatever. And you can't print, you know, we know from Germany in the 30s, you cannot go on printing money endlessly, because ultimately it'll blow up in your face. Now they know that, they've always known that. And so they've all used all these nonsense bits and pieces, which I won't bore the listeners with, to cover it up. And of course, the COVID cover-up, as I call it, is the greatest gift that they have given themselves and manipulated into this horror. And what happened in Lidl locally was the epitome of what happens when a people so shit scared of their own selves fall into line, create rank, and then point the finger. And I have to say this, myself, my wife, you, and all these people who speak truth have that yellow star now.
That's right.
And I use that metaphor because it will be even more dramatic than even that was dressed up to be. It existed, it happened, millions died everywhere, all over the world, and are constantly dying. In fact, more millions now. But the point is that I don't know, I mean, there are many strands of people who say, oh, it's the depopulation program, or it's this program or that program. Yeah, there are all sorts of labels, just there are all sorts of labels as who we label ourselves with. But if we put all that aside, we are humanity. We are the human race. We are one family. We are all come here in our various disguises and guises to do the work of self-knowledge. And in that self-knowledge, we enhance the awareness of what it is to be in this realm, in this humanity. And until we really get that and let go of all the little labels that actually are purely there ultimately to distract us, which of course is another technique of keeping us away from looking, facing and speaking truth. I always remember somebody famous, and it was Sai Baba, who frankly, I have to tell you, I exposed with my friend David Bailey, who is his music master for the children there in Puttapati. It was myself and David that actually exposed Sai Baba for the paedophile that he was. But he's, as with so much of what he said, he stole this wonderful thing that somebody else said. I can't remember at this time who it was, but it certainly wasn't him who originated it, who said, you may be born into a religion, but for God's sake, do not die in one. And I will also say, you can be born and take on labels, but for God's sake, do not die with a label on. And because, I don't know what your feelings are, Zed, on this, but it's about really, it's about increasing the beautifulness of everything and also underlying the whole strand. As much as it may sound caustic to some, the bottom line is we are here to develop, understand, create, and live love.
Absolutely.
Because love is the purest essence of being, of everything, of creation. We do not understand one iota of it. We pretend we do by falling in love or doing the romantic love type stuff, which has nothing to do with it. It's merely Hollywood. But actually, until we personally can love ourselves, by knowing ourselves, we have to know ourselves in order to love ourselves. Once we love ourselves, the work is done for the external, because that's all we radiate. And if we try and fix somebody else, in other words, try and tell somebody else to love themselves, when we don't ourselves, it's like beating yourself against a brick wall. It's so nice when you stop.
Yeah, that's right. It just seems to me, and it's obvious now, isn't it? I think that there has been a long-running agenda going on that really has sort of corralled and divided everybody to the point now where you're getting harassed by someone in Lidl. And it kind of occurred to me straight away that, you know, to sort of say, well, you shouldn't be out if you're infected, because that's the only way the mask works, isn't it? You know, we're told masks don't work, don't wear the mask unless you are infected, you know. And you know, I've said to people, said, well, look, if you're that terrified about being outside, stay in. You know,
Don't go outside. Absolutely.
Don't go outside. You know. So you know, how has this been for you from when this started? Because for me, it has been it was a real shock, I have to say, when this started to roll out, because I knew they were doing something. I said to my partner last year, I said, you know, enjoy it, because, you know, life is going to change. And I was told I was crazy and this, that, and the other. I'm over dramatizing everything. And yet here we are, right? So when did this sort of begin for you, the realization of what was actually happening?
Because I've been, like yourself, into researching behind the behind, it was an inevitability that something was going to come along. Other things had been tried and tested. Most of them, like, you know, the false flags that happened, were discovered on too great a basis, for instance, to take it any further. They needed this. They had been trialing, you know, as I said before, they've been trialing these, you know, these medical methods of manipulation. And over a year ago, I caught what I can only understand as what the symptoms are being put out about what COVID is. I caught COVID. I've been brought up on an organic, healthy lifestyle on a farm for the first 15 years of my life. I have an immune system that is bulletproof. I have therefore never acquainted myself with the inside of a hospital since I think I fell down the stairs when I was 7. That was the last time. Oh, and I had a small crash when I was on an assignment in France in a car and briefly went into hospital. That crash, by the way, should have killed me, but I have particular angels, it seems, that are keen that I keep going. So I'm only dutifully doing my duty and doing my contract. But anyway, so when I got this you know, over a year ago, these symptoms, it was crushing. It was like the most terrible flu that I'd had. And I went through it, and it went on, and it went on for weeks, which is so unusual. But I just let it go. I just let it do its stuff. And I was allegedly at that dangerous age which takes people out. Well, all I say is, excuse my French, bollocks to that, because, you know, if you're going to be feed that and you're going to believe that, well, yes, it'll come about, I'm sure. But I don't. I know exactly my own inner and outer workings, and I know my medical health is what it is. And so I came through that. So I thought, that's fascinating. Let's watch what's happening next. And then my wife went through a similar period. And so if I'm to take what they're telling us, I am so totally protected from anything of, you know, that is supposedly there. But the problem is that no matter how many people they put up as in defense of the settled science, which is what they're saying all the time, settled science, and which is the stupidest thing anybody can say, because no science is ever settled. Otherwise, you wouldn't call it science. It's just so true. Anyway, so this is promoted as this, that, and the other. And everybody who's not allowed to join in on the conversation, who are so far more professional than the likes of the Whittles, who are paid millions by bloody Bill Gates Foundation, and Imperial College, who I think received 55 million or something to look at this thing. And then you get people like Knut Witowski, Professor Witowski, you get Dr. Judy Mikovits, you get Andrew Kaufman, you get Cameron Kyle Siddle, you get John Ioannidis, John Ashton from our very own UK, Dr. Vernon Coleman, who is possibly the epitome of the doctor that we all remembered in our childhood, who come around and say, dear, dear, don't worry, you know, all that. I mean, fabulous guy. And they are coming out with the truth all the time. Rashid Buttar. Zed, I haven't yet, you know, I've got a large section on my site of your stuff, right? And I have not got, I have not had a day when YouTube has taken down a video and I've had to replace it. Because the glorious thing about this site that I set up about 6 weeks ago was that I made sure before I even listened to the video, I'd copy it, download. So we'd always have it. So we're never taken down. If we are taken down, like for instance, the London Reel and the David Icke interviews were, we are in very serious totalitarian territory. So at least I've got a bellwether here. If I'm taken down, and all of these people like yourself and all the other professionals who are hyper more professional than any of these puppets that the government use, then we know that A, we're speaking the truth, but B, that we are also in grave danger of becoming Nazi Germany on steroids. And I don't say that lightly. I don't say that lightly because, frankly, if anybody does any history at all, they will know that what we're about to go through, if it comes to pass, and I say it's a big if, right? Although it looks terribly dangerous, it is a big if, and I'll explain in a moment why. Then, you know, there is this, what certainly people around here have been talking about, as you know, is the split of two dimensions, two realities. And thankfully, you and I are living a reality that we know is not going to disappear because it is our reality. It's not my reality, is not yours. Yours is not mine. However, we do live alongside, almost like we're living in the same street. And it's comforting to know that there are like minds and we can communicate and have conversations that so far are not knocked on the head by a totalitarian ban of the whole internet. The beauty of that, Zed, of the internet being knocked out to stop inquiry, to stop truth, right, is that it will take all those idiots who live and breathe on their handhelds. They won't be able to use it.
Yes, that's right.
Now, I don't know whether you're aware, but there is a huge crack in the magnetic shift of the North and South Pole at the moment. And somebody was speaking actually on Mainstream about it, an American scientist. And they said, well, and he said, well, what? The interviewer said, well, for me, you know, the normal person, how will it affect me? And he said, well, you just lose all electricity, you lose all communication. I mean, not a lot, no. And of course, that would be terror for these people. And that's where the zombie nation would rise up and go crazy because they haven't got their addiction in their hand to be able to connect with their virtual reality that they live with.
That's right. What's always surprised me is that, especially with our country, it always seems to be sort of touted as the great democracy, the great freedom in the world. In fact, where everyone else sort of follows. You know, even America isn't quite right. Australia has sort of got its kind of a copy of what we do and stuff like this, and yet this is where I think it is sort of happening the worst, it seems. Maybe I'm wrong because I'm not in Italy, I'm not in Germany, I'm not in Spain. However, from our point of view, we seem to have lost overnight many of the freedoms that you know, freedom of expression. My videos are being taken down by YouTube, which is Google and Alphabet and all that kind of thing. And the country is now divided in a way that, I mean, I've never experienced in my lifetime, and I think, you know, for everybody who is of an elder generation, must be, and especially if you're ill, must be absolutely terrifying to be going through. Because I'm quite worried about what's going on. I'm young, I'm healthy, my immune system's very much like yours. I don't go to the doctor, I don't need to. And in fact, when I did go to the doctor, they said, oh, well, you're the invisible man because you never turn up here. So I don't go. I don't need to go. You know, I went for, I was bullied by my partner to go and get a lump checked out. So I did, and it was fine. And so this is kind of like what I can see is the biggest attack on democracy and freedom that I think I've ever experienced.
It is, and I have to say that democracy was never all it was made out to be. It was just another acracy or ocracy or whatever, or ism, and it's a shame. But you see, I've got previous on this because my great uncle. I don't know whether you discovered in research my book Dreams and Realities, but my great uncle was also a journalist for the Daily Telegraph. He was the war correspondent based in New York. Now in the 20s, I don't believe that we were at war with New York with America, but anyway, he was a war correspondent there, and he gave up his assignment in the British Army to use his pen as his sword. While he was there, he was on his uppers. He wrote a book with a friend of his, an American friend of his, who was one of the world experts at the time. It's called Man's Best Friend: The Story of the Dog. He wrote it because he wanted his stipend of his meager earnings as a journalist to be heightened. It didn't in his lifetime, but it became the British Dog Club's, whatever they called themselves, iconic book on dogs until about 1953 after his death. But while he was writing that in the New York City Library, he discovered his lineage and he got interested in that. In fact, I have beside me here in the office a most fabulous family tree that goes back to 55 BC and whatever his name, King of England, King of Britain. But within that, he discovered that his great grandfather was the one that gave George Washington hold up in Valley Forge when they were about to be defeated by the British in the Revolutionary War, gave him 14,000 in gold because he was an extremely rich landowner in the southern states. He was his father was one of the founders of the southern states. Okay, they came over from the Caribbean, but so they were devoted to the independence cause. Gave him the money. History turned, and my great uncle suddenly saw, my God, this debt. This gift that then became a debt when George Washington became president has never been repaid, and it was on 6% per annum compound. So he thought, Mark, and at his time alone, it was worth millions, right? So he set about, with the help of the New York Times that he was working with, and he knew very well, and also he got the Fox brothers in Hollywood to do a script, and they're going to do a film. The whole thing was going to big reveal. And he had the help of a great friend who was one of the great oligarchs, but he was the black sheep of the oligarchs. And he discovered then, all the interconnectedness of things. And just previous to actually on his exposure, on the reveal that they did to launch this whole Get Back the War Loans thing, which was also undercover, he was destroyed. Something happened, and it's all in the book, something happened that actually broke. And then he was set on a journey of total and utter destruction of everything he'd done. And he set himself, he was never one to sort of lie down. He got up, he said, okay, what the hell's going on? And he started investigating who was behind this. And he discovered he was the patsy used to cover up what they were doing that created the crash of 29. And he discovered, of course, the Rothschilds, the Federal Reserve, the family of 8 that ran the whole bloody business that we know now. Everything we know now, and as part of all the system that is now trying to control us, these were the seeds. And it is an absolute fascinating description and story. It's exciting because he was like Snowden. He was then chased to the ends of the world, to the ends of the earth. I won't tell you what happens because it will be revealed, semi-revealed at the end of the book. But suffice to say, my heritage is one of uncovering nasty stuff and showing the world the truth. And I'm so proud to be part of the inheritance, really. So these beings, I mean, for the sake of not really getting into labels, because you can think of 100 labels, let's call them the cabal that have instigated this whole purposeful change. Technology has been their friend. Television was the greatest thing. The inception of television brought Marshall McLuhan's "The Medium is the Message" into a reality that was dystopian and has been dystopian ever since. No one's recognized it because they've been entertained. That is the bread and circus that they're given. right? People who do not research, do not ask questions, they accept the bread and circus. Let them eat cake. You know, the Antoinette thing is now, let them have their mobiles, let them have their handhelds, let them have their apps. Because frankly, that is what has transfixed, hypnotized, and kept them in utter subservience. And so when you challenge that, and all it means is a conversation. Like the other night, I went out to get my bin in, and they were just finishing their clapping. The street. I had also previously played Bob Marley's stand-up, you know, and over that I'd done this sort of voiceover, which I then penned into it, which was obey, obey, you know, one wonderful thing. You'll see it on the site if you go there. But it was just such fun. But anyway, I stopped and I said, but rather than clapping for the nurses, who are completely underpaid and not resourced and not ever given any of the right stuff, why don't you shout and jeer against the government? One lady, who's a very dear lady, she's a neighbour, she just said, I'm not taking this, and walked back inside. Okay, that's fine. Lovely. Erection. Another lady who I know well, she said, I'm not political, but I think the Tories are doing a very good job. And so you know that you're amongst this sea of, I don't know quite what, of deafness, blindness, obstinate refusal, cognitive dissonance on steroids. And it's very difficult. So how do we break this? How do we get round it? That's the question, isn't it, Zed?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I've been working on and trying to figure out as we go, really. And over the years, I thought that communication, and as long as we kept talking, that was the important thing, you know, sort of rally against the information, try and find out as much facts as we can, speak to whistleblowers, you know, and all that kind of thing happens. And that has helped. That has sort of held back the tide a little bit, I think, from what everyone has been doing. However, you know, a couple of years ago, I sort of really got overwhelmed with this and thought, well, what I'll do is I'll set up a platform, which is what I call Go Vote, which is now getting hundreds of thousands of people joining, and so that we can have our say. And then, of course, we started to get politicians joining. We had Jeremy Corbyn join while he was still leader of the opposition, and he wanted to test it out. But he said, look, I can't really do anything because we're representative democracy, and this is a bit like direct democracy, and we can't really get involved. And how is this going to work? And so we've been working on just getting people together. And the more people we can get together, like we've got groups in the Midlands now, we've got groups up north, we're talking, you know, bringing people together. I think at this moment in time is all we can do, because I think the onslaught, I mean, television is the weapon of mass destruction that no one ever talks about, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so the onslaught of it is horrendous. And what I'm most ashamed of is the media, the mainstream media. I have spoken to journalists pretty much every day since this thing started, and I'm in kind of good conversation with a lot of them anyway over the time, and a lot of them are really good people in a terrible system. They cannot do anything about this. It just comes down to them, and they're forced to do what they do. So I'm sort of at the point now where I'm just kind of going, let's just try and get everyone together, and let's just try and get through the next bit. Let's just try and get through the next bit. What will break this? I don't know. What do you think?
It's fascinating. I mean, the other day I joined a Sri Ravi Shankar and many others. It wasn't hosted by him, but he was one of the guests. But many great visionaries and people. What's her name? Williamson. And many others. I can't remember offhand who they were. But they had this Mayday call, Mayday meditation. It was Mayday 21st, I think it was 21st of May, but
yes, that's right.
So it wasn't sort of Mayday as we know it. But the point is, I think it was the day of World Meditation, and it asked people all to come together to spend 20 minutes just focusing through their heart on peace, on order, on equality, on any of those elements that make up a sane civilization, a sane society. I don't know. I mean, I know that Sri Ravi Shankar has millions of followers, so I would say they were looking to have 1 billion people at one time, focusing intention on the change that we all would love to see. Now, that in itself is an extremely powerful tool, especially as Steve was saying earlier today, that vibration is everything. We all vibrate, and because of the waveform that we vibrate at, we see each other as human forms. But we are merely atoms of the universe coalesced into, through vibration, through whatever it is. So the fact that we use a power that is so powerful that we all possess, we don't have to go and buy it, we have it, just have to discover it, we have to get to know it, recognize it, and then utilize it to the very best of our ability. To be able to use that in that force, and this is where the internet is so positive and beneficial, that can bring us all together within the technology that we have, and do this. That makes a tremendous, powerful difference. Now, I will shortly, over the next few days, because it's been very busy, I'm shortly going to do an article and layout with some of my great friends who are far more, far better informed and qualified in these areas. Although I certainly myself have used it to great effect at times myself, are going to share with people how utterly simply they can utilize the focus on somewhere they love. For instance, we're not allowed to go to churches, are we? They're all banned. Mosques, they're all banned, right? Mm-hmm. Now, all of these churches and mosques and all these sacred places, or even stone circles, your favorite Neolithic site, are all placed very specifically, long before any of this nonsense started, placed very specifically on energy centers, earth energy centers. Now those earth energy centers all link up, and they create this sort of this encasement around our earth, and through that, whatever is projected through that creates the creative forces that then are allowed to live, breathe, and everything else. They are being used by the other side to do all this nonsense on that level. However, the force of each and every one of us to be able to connect through that, have a vision, have a photo, have an idea, an understanding of that sacred church you go to every Sunday, or the mosque, or the sacred site, or the holy place, or whatever. The tree here, that the lovely thorn tree and everything. Just focus on that. Pour out that love, balance, understanding, compassion into that. All the things that we're so often told this is what to do, but do that very specifically, just for a few moments. And what that does to the force field is neutralize anything that's coming the other way through the other intention. Now, that is not the be-all and end-all. What you and I and many others in their various different guises are setting up, doing, and everything else is all ingredients into the great mix, the soup that our soup is love, ultimately, bottom line, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yes,
and collective community, which is what the Go Vote is, as it were, a point of focus for. As I say, every hamlet, every village, every town, every shire, every city, every place needs to rise up and say no. And as many numbers as can be, brought together.
Yeah.
And don't label it, because the point is, if you label it, then say, well, I'm not going to go because they're this or that. No, I'm going to, you just get into the same game you're being played all the time. However, I don't know whether the lawful rebellion people, they've actually served the Article 61 Magna Carta Charter onto the government.
Yes, I do know that. Yeah,
exactly. So as you know, June the 22nd is the 30 days lapse period that we have to hold before we can lawfully rebel, stand out there peacefully and say, not in my name. And, we are so powerful. We completely misunderstand how powerful we are. Individually, we think, well, because that's our conditioning, I'm not very powerful, how can I do it? Yeah, you haven't even discovered to know who you are. You may think that. Okay, but don't hold your horses on it because it's not true. But if you wish to believe it, carry on. But it is not true. You are the most potent being on this whole globe, on this blue marble. And all you do is you haven't recognized it. But there are many of us who know, in some degree or other, that we can change things. The thing that destroys that will be our fear that we can't, will be the hopelessness that we bring to the table, as well as the hope. You cannot, to a banquet of beauty, you cannot bring an ugly, decayed fruit. And hopelessness is such a fruit.
Mm-hmm.
It has served its purpose, past its sell-by date. You don't need it. Just put it in the compost. Let it regurgitate itself into something useful, like good soil.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, I always sort of seem to come back to that lovely last film of Peter Sellers, you know, Being There.
Yeah. No, I watched it the other day, and I got the book.
I mean, you know, the whole thing, and his simple understanding of things became the president's ear.
Yeah.
I mean, I love that man. I was brought up on the Goons. The Goons' humor was the thing that has saved me over and over again. If I start getting a little bit despondent, I go to YouTube, thank you YouTube, and I play the Goons. And I listen to Sellers, to Seagoon, and to Milligan. I mean, these are the greats, and others, so many others that followed and emulated. Humor is also one of our greatest weapons. It keeps us light.
Yes, that's right. And that has certainly been damaged, hasn't it? In you know, over this time, with, you know, what is there to laugh about anymore and stuff like that. This has gone off television. This has gone from you know, the media completely, and it is insane.
Yeah, I mean, it is. They have willfully destroyed humor. They have willfully killed the jester in the court of the king. That never ever happened. But it hasn't. They haven't killed. They've killed the chimera. They've killed the pixelated image that we put up for them to kill, because they can't kill us. They can't kill the thought. They cannot kill the idea.
That's right.
We are so invulnerable, and we need to touch that invulnerability and to action it, exercise it. And when we do that, the power that comes from that, it is a beautiful power. It's a power that shows love in its resplendent beauty. And it is a power whereby you can use the word awe in its true sense, and not because it's a Big Mac. I mean, language, as you know, and I know, I mean, for me, language is just so beautiful.
Yeah.
I have grown to love it. I mean, I've grown beyond the report in my prep school, where the English master said, he writes with interest, but could do better. Well, I spent my life doing better, because I haven't yet, even now, I haven't yet found my best self. I know that I am my best self. I want to live it to the full. And that's what we all can do, must do, if we want anything that we dream of.
Bless you. Yeah, absolutely. Just for people who may be listening to this, who don't quite understand what totalitarianism is, do you want to just sort of go through a little bit of how dangerous this actually is to us as a society?
My wife was born in Russia. She was brought up in Estonia. She lived under the Soviet rule and regime. The Soviet regime was not the Russian people, and is not still the Russian people. What's happening at the moment now in Russia, and has been ever since Putin has been given the reins, is something beautiful to behold. And if you believe anything that comes out Western press, don't. Simply don't. Let that go and get to know the reality. And I have to say, I've been to Russia, I know the Russians, and I have not lived under a totalitarian regime, but I have experienced them. And they are not pretty. They are evil, because they are a few entities, I'm not even going to call them human, a few entities who have grabbed power, played with it for as long as they possibly can. Because the ultimate nature of totalitarianism, of any fascism or anything where there is this dystopian control, cannot and must not be able to live. It cannot live. Nature will never allows it to. That's why it always fails. But what it is, what it consists of, is a complete harnessing of everything you think of that you as a human being are able to enjoy, especially as you enjoy so-called in this country. If you are enjoying what is presently presented in this country, you have been so polarized, and I would ask you to look at that book on political ponerology, and it's a book on psychopathy, and it's written by one of the scientists who, under the Soviet regime, was asked to describe and to codify scientifically what psychopathy is. Because when the people who commissioned found it and read what it was so close to the truth that they destroyed it. These scientists were then whittled down. Several of them died, you know, whatever. But and then those that survived rewrote it. Again, it was destroyed. Then this guy, sorry, I can't remember his name without finding the link, but he then, with I think one other, was left, and he rewrote it again. Imagine the mental capacity to hold all that information to do 700 pages again. Mm. He wrote it and he sent a copy off to the US. Oh, poor fool. Anyway, it went off there. And it was only some friends of mine at sot.net who actually, and with Red Pill Publishing, got his work published. It is profound, because within that work, you will understand and comprehend everything that is the backbone of totalitarianism, of tyranny in its worst form. To believe that this could not possibly happen here in England, in the United Kingdom, belies the fact that already, as we're speaking, we are living under a military dictatorship. Not many people know that the 77 Brigade has taken over government.
That's right.
Investigate it, people. The 77 Brigade, that is just one arm of the totalitarian takeover that's happened. I remember there was a film, wasn't there? There was a series on TV, BBC, and this is what they do. They pre-program you by having all these things way back, you know, in the 60s, 70s. Yeah, there are the films that they've made that are telling you exactly what's going to happen, you know, and all those films about viruses and plagues and stuff. The same thing. It's called predictive programming. That's right. And so a few years ago, they had this series on about how the military came in and shut things down because there was, I think it was a virus even, and there was this estate, you know, that looked pretty much like any of the estates around Glastonbury. And there were people who were saying, this doesn't right. And then there was somebody who worked in the military and said, no, there's some muggy stuff going on. And it was fascinating, because I so often think of excerpts from that series, and I wish I could remember the name, because it's such an education to watch some of this bloody stuff, the propaganda they've been putting out under the guise of entertainment. Yeah. But yeah, it's not a pretty place to be. We are presently in it, whether you like it or not, but we do not have to live in it any longer than we desire. We have to stand up. And if you want to stand up behind my back, please do. If you want to stand up behind Zed's back, do so. Because we're there. We have put our heads above the parapet. I couldn't care less if they come along and physically shoot me. It would just totally and utterly show where we are, where what we're saying is truth.
That's right.
They won't do that because we're too powerful. So don't even fear that. I don't. Don't fear fear. Fear nothing. Be fearless. Speak your truth. Discuss. Hug people. Shake hands. Because all of that social, do you know that social distancing thing? Do you know where it came from?
No, go on.
In 2006, a 16-year-old teenager came up with the idea, and the American Washington bought it and started to put it in place. That's where it came from, folks, a 16-year-old. It's a pity that we put so much trust in a 16-year-old who really not done their homework. You know, the Gretas of this world, and this silly person who I don't even know the name, it's not worth it. But yeah, I mean, we have been truly like trouts in a trout stream.
Yeah.
And my great uncle Harry Plunkett Green, a fabulous baritone in Victorian times, one of the great Irishmen, and also my passport to getting a passport to Ireland, which I'm going to be doing, just to tell people. But he wrote a wonderful book called Where the Bright Waters Meet, and it was a book about fishing trout on a tributary of the Itchen in Hampshire. It is called the Fisherman's Bible because it is one of the most beautifully written, simple, 80-page books out on fishing. But we, like that, the trouts have taken the fly of propaganda, the fly of misinformation, and we have swallowed it and been taken up. Well, there's always a way to get that hook out of your mouth, and it's done by speaking truth.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to have to talk a day in a second. Let's just say to everyone where they can read your work and your website.
The website is called The Freedom Cycle. That's as in bicycle. TheFreedomCycle.com. That's the homepage. If you want to go straight to the COVID stuff, it's /COVID. Very simple. Right. So TheFreedomCycle.com /COVID. And there you'll find not only Zed's stuff, but all the other professionals of all the fields that have been completely censored and taken out of the conversation. And I think the simple question is, Zed, people have to ask themselves, if I'm not allowed to talk about something, does that make me live in a democracy or a dystopian reality that has my freedoms as the last thing on the list, even if it's on the list at all? You'll probably remember better than I. Who was it? I think it was attributed to Voltaire, wasn't it? Those who you're not allowed to criticize are those as the greatest enemy, or something like that.
Yeah, that's right. I remember.
It's so in your face. We're talking about, well, prove it. Just take whatever comes out of the mouths of these nonsense people, take it and invert it, and you know the truth from that inversion.
Yeah, that's what I keep saying to people. I say it's always the opposite.
and yet cleverly, isn't it? It's Boris who comes up and says, "Go out, don't go out."
So we are saying, don't go to work, go to work. Don't take public transport, go to work, don't go to work. Stay indoors. If you can work from home, go to work. Don't go to work. Go outside, don't go outside. And then we will or won't something or other.
So I'm always up for people to suggest stuff to go on there. But on the humour mill, you've got Matt and his wonderful his wonderful thing on the on his takeoff of Boris Johnson giving his party political or whatever. And there's another couple, Larry and Paul, who go behind those wretched things they stand on for the daily conferences, and they give this hilarious sort of description of the reality of those conferences. Great fun.
Emotionless greeting, noting general disappointment that I'm not the Prime Minister, saying how difficult this is for everyone, although not me. 3-part slogan with strong but awkwardly timed hand gestures, thinking I look like Churchill, trying to sound as clever as this scientist.
Slight nod of the head, pretending I don't think you're incompetent, understanding you're going...
Great fun. We have to laugh, don't we? We really have to laugh.
Yes, we really do. And I want to thank you for joining me today. You have been a tonic, an absolute tonic for me. I promise you that. And I'll speak to you in a minute. And thank you, Jonathan, ever so much.
Not at all. Thank you, and thank everybody for doing their bit. And the bit is truth and love.
Absolutely.